Hello, 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 check, 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 check. Check, check, check. Okay. Witch on the Holy Night. Wir machen das. Gutes altes Visual Novel. Place bookmark. Search for bookmark. Also, configure. Voice settings. Also, Music volume. Text settings. Was gibt's noch für Language? Ja, ich verstehe nur das Englisch. Scaling. Okay. Wird schon passen. Gut, na dann. It was a winter's day 8 years ago. That solemn morning when she understood the value of her life for the first time. Her home was nestled in the side of a mountain. Around it was nothing but inhospitable wilderness. She had no neighbors or childhood friends to speak of. Things like traveling to school or playing outside were more trouble than they ought to be. Indeed, with its pure water and bright stars, it was a place rich with memories both frustrating and halcyon. That was only during summer, though. Winters in those mountains were extremely frigid, each morning more severe than the last. Her father would drive her to the train station after waiting 10 minutes for the engine to warm up and the iced over windows to clear.
キーを回してきてくれるかい?
Mind starting up the car for me? Her father would savor his morning coffee, leaving her to venture outside and rev the engine. Out the front door she would go, traversing the garden with icy breath until she reached that old sedan. As always, she inserted the key that started the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. Just as she proudly finished that humble task she's done so many times before. Okay. A shrill scream pierced the air. She knew, even though it wasn't human, that the feeble sound was a cry of agony. A few moments passed. Her father came out and opened the hood of the car. Creaking Fanbells. Oh nein! Oh nein, eine tote Katze. Sie hat die Katze umgebracht. A monstrous-looking engine. And something that didn't belong. There was a cat, a mother by the looks of it, and her 2 kittens. Katzensaft. Oh nein. Es ist Katzensaft.
Alf hat eine Katze getrunken. Ha.
Das ist kein Haha-Moment. The 3 cats had been huddling for warmth in the engine's compartment. The mother's cat was missing its head.
Katzensaft.
One of the kittens had been mangled beyond recognition by the engine and bells and surely died instantly. The other kitten, its face half covered in blood, painted faintly. It desperately clung to its mother, or rather, the chunk of meat that had been its mother, with the last bit of life it could muster. Poor things. Her father lamented their plight. The previous night has been especially cold. After he had returned home yesterday, the cats must have snuck under the hood, drawn by the warmth of the engine. I had slept next to the engine and had walked into a storm of spinning bells. Cars in the 80s were not sealed particularly well, so this was not unheard of.
いいんだ。
It's okay.
が悪いんじゃ
It
ない。
wasn't your fault. Her father's voice seemed distant. She could only make out a small tuft of the kitty's grey fur. The rest of it was caked in blood, and of its mother and brother. I could see its skull. The fragile life of a speckled kitten. Trembling and possibly blind, it continued to nuzzle against its dead mother's chest.
待ちなさい
Wait.
She took the kitten into her arms and ran deep into the mountains, to her grandfather's house. Was it because she was overcome with regret, or was it the shock of grief? Years later, she still wasn't sure. Fighting back the welling tears, she burst into her grandfather's workshop. Her grandfather was a magician who could do anything. She had never seen magic. She knew that magic was a fantasy straight out of the fairy tales. But so was her grandfather. She had to find him. He was the only one who could
そ
help.
の子猫の運命を変え
I
ろと
suppose you want me to alter this kitten's fate.
The cave-dwelling magician said indifferently.
The kitten.
The kitten, this kitten needs our help, she pleaded. Whether it was a simple task or a Herculean labor, her grandfather would not say. He simply granted the girl's childish wish like a machine. Oh no, the girl said. Before she knew it, however, she was holding a tiny corpse in her hands. Its fur was cold, the warmth of life had left its body, and the tears she had fought so hard to hold back poured from her eyes. Regret spread through her chest like an endless grey sky.
トロだったな
We were too late. Some things cannot be undone.
Her mind struggled to overcome the grips with what had just occurred. The last 10 minutes were a total blank. Who she met, what she had known, it was all as if it never happened. The only thing she was sure of was that life, once extinguished, can never return.
そこに誰かいるの
That day, it was her mistake that gave birth to me. Indeed. Whatever occurred that day, it was a day of nostalgia and longing. This is the fairy tale of 80 years ago, the day they first met that no magic can ever bring back. Arrogant, greedy and able only to destroy, I must be a wolf. I don't have regrets, there's no looking back. If my pride has left you behind, my sincere condolences. But at any rate, I suppose it's my fate to die at the hands of a little Red Riding Hood. Einfach Fate. Aber Red Riding Hood ist Rotkäppchen, glaube ich. The rain, it do be wet. It was a quiet morning. From her bed she could see the sky was an ashen watercolor grey. The thermometer displayed 43 degrees Fahrenheit, a rather unforgiving temperature for November. Her stomach woke her up with a growl, pathetically reminding her that she had completely missed her breakfast. But lazy mornings like today were her a blessing. It was already well past 8 in the morning. On any ordinary weekday, tardiness would be unavoidable, but today classes were cancelled in commemoration of the school's anniversary. Gratefully, she had every intention of taking it easy for the first time in ages. Outside the window was a gloomy grey, and it reminded her more of evening than morning. It wasn't a pleasant morning by any stretch of the imagination, but having been up all night until just 3 hours ago, she couldn't care less about the weather outside. All she cared about was more sleep. As long as she could spend her morning in bed, what was happening outside was no concern to her. She shut the curtains, then closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Tried to
せめてあと2時間ぐらいは凡庸な夢を見ていられますように。
I'd like a nice, uneventful dream for 2 hours. Thank you. Blissful slumber found her soon enough. Her consciousness faded. However, her simple request would be mercilessly refused. A faint but shrill sound lingered in her ears. It was the unmistakable ring of a telephone. Much to her chagrin, her eyes popped open out of habit. Ah, come on. Why today of all days? The telephone was situated in the foyer on the first floor. Answering it meant walking down a 30-foot corridor and going down a flight of stairs. In a sleep-deprived state, the distance seemed somewhere between incredibly far and astronomically far. The phone's incessant ringing continued. She knew the caller would eventually give up if she ignored it, but she chose to fight the urge.
アリス出ないの?
Why doesn't Alice answer it? She thought her housemate would get it, but she soon had to abandon all hope. The realization struck that her housemate did not have the day off from school and was likely in class at her prestigious little hilltop academy. The caller proved incredibly persistent. That persistence made the volume of the ringing seem even louder. I'm trying to sleep over here. Sleep here. She was left with no choice but to get up, throw a top on, and leave the room. Ah, it's cold. She rubbed her hands together to warm her numb fingers. The mansion's heating system was inadequate, to say the least, which meant that winter was the very worst of uninvited guests. Never more so than on a dreary morning as this, when one didn't need to use a thermometer to know how cold it was. The mansion sat in the mountains and was surrounded by dense forest. Winter always arrived here first, before moving on to nearby towns. The robotic ring of the telephone reverberated throughout the long hallway. The mansion's furnishing had been so perfectly maintained that it made the place feel unlived. It seemed lonelier than it did splendid. Coupled with the dreary morning, it could have passed for a haunted house.
ま、幽霊屋敷その
It's
も
a
のだけ
haunted
ど、
house, I suppose.
だいたい2人で
It's
住
too
むの
large
広す
for
ぎる
just the two of us. She's counted more than 30 rings since it first began. The caller either had a lot of free time on their hands or had a good understanding of the house's circumstances. She had a strong hunch that it was the latter. The window above looked out onto a gloomy sky. She hastened to catch the unrelenting ring in the act as soon as possible, though she had the feeling that her happy morning might come to a close the moment she caught it. It was here that a series of incidents began. Apologies for the lack of romance to this tale. For whether it be objectively true or merely supposition, it is always from gloomy and unassuming beginnings that extraordinary events are set into motion. Ach, wie hübsch. Planning Takashi Takeuchi Kinoko Nasu. Scenario Kinoko Nasu. Original art, character design, Kiyoyama Hirokazu, und Graphics Director. Ach, das ist sehr schön, die Bilder hier. Hübsche Bilder. Script Director Tsukuri Monji. Music Hideyuki Fukasawa, Keita Haga. Lead Background Artist Iuro. Wir wissen, wen wir verfolgen müssen, den roten Regenschirm. Graphics Takao Aotsuki Shimokoshi. Lead Programmer Kyobe. Witch on the Holy Night. Ein hübsches kleines Visual Novel von Tycoon. The rain had subsided somewhat by the time she reached the school gate. Sunlight seemed to be playing peekaboo behind the clouds in the distance. It looked like it might be cleared up by early afternoon.
と言っても、私には関係のない話だけど。
Not as it has anything to do with me though. The weather reflected her luck. On top of being forced out of the house at such an early hour, she had to suffer through a winter rain. I'm getting a bad feeling about this. The sinking feeling she had only grew as she passed through the entrance and held it inside. She didn't encounter any students along the way, nor did she see anyone taking part in club activities either. The reception desk to the faculty room simply read "faculty closed." The school had given all of its students the day off, except those explicitly summoned like her. The fact that irked her more and more as the minute passed. She opened the door to the faculty room and headed towards the desk she had revisited a number of times before. The man at the desk wore a plain shirt and a suit that were nonetheless neatly pressed. Slim-framed glasses adorned his face, giving off an amicable yet cunning air. The mild-mannered image this mid-20s man presented clashed with the cigarette he smoked. He didn't appear to have noticed her yet.
Yamashiro sensei.
Mr. Yamashiro. Mr. Yamashiro. She closed the door with a bang. Showing no response to the sudden sound, Mr. Yamashiro lifted his head.
Yeah.
Hey there.
Aozaki-kun.
Good morning, Miss Aozaki. I guess this means you got the call.
はい。1時間前に
Yes,
自
they
宅で
called me at
事前に
home
何の相
about
談
an
もな
hour
く
ago, out of the blue. Having graduated from his high school himself, Mr. Yamashiro was not much older than the rest of the students. For that reason, the students preferred him over the other teachers. He always had something interesting to talk about and kept conversations casual. In fact, he seemed more like an older student than a teacher, but she unfortunately didn't share her fellow students' fondness for him. She was of the opinion that teachers should come across as more austere, like an iron fist that could inspire both love and hate in equal measure, not a buddy to joke and pal around with. Da stimme ich aber nicht zu, ich finde Buddy-Lehrer ist schon besser. He was the exact opposite of how she felt a teacher should be, and it was only natural that her manner towards him would be forced and unfriendly. Not that she'd ever been wired to make friendly small talk. You're in foul mood today.
それは先生の気
You
のせいで
must
す
be imagining it.
今日だ
I'm
け
like this
特
every
別
day. The matter of fact answer was perfectly matched the displeasure displayed in her face. Her bad mood from having to get up early and the tiredness from staying up late must have collectively made her look positively adversarial.
そうなら
If
いいん
you
だけど
say
ね
so, just
彼
go
にはそう
easy
辛
on
く当
our
たらない
guest,
でくれ
okay?
よ
To be honest,
僕
we're
らじゃ
not
正直
completely sure
どう
how to
扱っ
deal
ていい
with him
先
yet.
生
About
その
that,
件ですけど
what do you want to
私
tell me? What the
ま
hell
だ
is going
詳しい
on?
話を
Because
聞かせ
I have no clue. As Mr. Yamashiro met her piercing eyes, he finally understood the reason behind her tone and slowly put out his cigarette.
電話じゃあな
Let's
んて
start
聞い
at
た
the
の
beginning. What did they tell you over the phone?
転入生の紹介をする
Just that
とだけです
I'd be
理由も
introduced to a
脈絡もない
transfer
説明で
student.
し
They
た
were a little hazy on the rest, though. One of Mr. Yamashiro's eyebrows stood up, impressed with the brevity of her answer. He could see that she was angry not because she had been called to school on her day off, but because she hadn't been told why she was here. Mr. Yamashiro chuckled sympathetically.
先生これが笑い話なら
If this
そろ
was
そろ
all
帰
a
っていいでしょ
joke
うか
to you, perhaps I should just go home.
いやご
Wait,
めんごめん
wait, I
謝
didn't
る
mean
よ
to laugh. This is
冗
not
談
a
じゃなくて
practical joke.
真面目な
What
話
do you use your
本
head?
当に転入生の
There
問題
really
で
is a transfer student?
うん
Yes,
訳ありというか
but-
難しいという
yes,
か
how should I put it? Difficult
彼
circumstances.
宗十郎君というんだけど
Sojiro.
ちょっといろいろとずれていてね
Peculiar.
僕らが案内してあげるより
Someone around
同世代
the
の
same
君の
age
方
would be
が
best
適任だと
suited
思
to
ったん
show
だ
him the ropes. She threw him an unamused look. It was negligent of them to be pushing teaching duties on her. But she did wonder how exactly this transfer student was peculiar. Maybe he meant the student had behavioral problems or was difficult somehow, but peculiar? She didn't have the slightest idea what it meant.
ずれてるの
You don't have a teacher
そう使
call
わない
someone
表現
that every day. She had her doubts, but swept them aside for now. This wasn't the time to get distracted by more concerns. The fact remained that this conversation was all the peculiar she could handle, and she needed more information. She was already beginning to fantasize about saying no and curling up in her warm bed at home.
一つ質
I
問
have
が
a
何
question.
あ
Yes.
学年は君と同じ
he's
2
a
年生だよ
second year student like you.
性格は落ち着きがあっ
He's
て
well behaved
人の話をよく
and
聞くタイ
good
プ
listener. He's not the most
裏を返せば
intelligent individual,
覇気がないとも
but that
取れるけど
just means he'll be easier
それならそれで
to get along with, right?
青崎君とはクラスは違うけどきっと仲良くな
But I'm sure you'll get along just.
そういったことは本人から直接聞きますしはかりもそうではなく
None of
なぜ
that
私なん
answered
で
my
しょうか
question. Why me? Though her tone was still stern, it was clear that she was willing to cooperate. She had decided to put her feelings of dissatisfaction aside and focus on the task at hand. Forcing herself to act empathetic in spite of her self-absorbed nature was something she was used to. Paradoxically, this force of will was also the reason teachers put so much faith in her. To a point. At times that strength shattered expectation, and on those occasions they were left with no choice but to treat it like a natural disaster and weather it until it passed. That was how Mr. Yamashiro had come to deal with her as over the past
もう
year.
一度だけ聞き
I'll
ま
ask
す
you one more
山城
time,
先生
Mr. Yamashiro.
それで
Why do
なぜ
does
わ
it have to be me? Pressured by a question without a clear yes or no answer, he answered.
うん、それは
Well,
ね
about that.
別に青崎くんが先生方に敬遠されているのと同じぐらい信頼されていて、学校のためなら教師も生徒も一緒くたに切って捨てる鉄の生徒会長だからじゃないよ。
それ以外にこんな呼びつけを受ける理由はないと思います。
Her eyes did nothing to hide her disbelief as she glared at him. Strength far beyond that of an ordinary 17-year-old girl, coupled with the youthful beauty of one. Mr. Yamashiro let his lip a genuine smile, admiring the miraculous balance of qualities.
いや、責務だけでいいなら僕がやってるさ。この人選に関しちゃ教師や生徒会長といった役職も関係ないよ。なんていうか、こんな頼みを損得抜きで聞いてくれるのは君だけだと思ってね。適任ですからと強く推薦したわけ。
山城先生。
Mr. Yamashiro.
うわ、怖っ。
Oh dear.
もう
Would you stop
睨まない
glaring at me
睨まない。
like that
言ったろ
already? At least
僕には
put
と
on a
もかく
smile for
彼
you
には笑顔で
beyond your
とまあ
Look,
納
if you're
得してくれたな
agreeing
ら
to help,
すぐに移動しよ
you should go see him.
う。もうずいぶん
We've
待たせ
already
てしまってい
kept
る
him
からね。
waiting long enough
そ
as
れ
it
と
is.
雨の中ご
And
苦労様。
because you braved the
帰り
rain
は
to
もちろ
get
ん
here,
車で送
I'd
る
be
よ。
happy to give you a ride home. Mr. Yamashiro stood up gracefully. I'm good, thanks, she replied before turning and walking out of the faculty room. Regen. He had been waiting for about an hour. While he did the rain shower lightened into a drizzle. His mind wandered as he listened to the sound of the raindrops. Stühle. The room was filled with neatly arranged rectangular tables. He was the only one there. Quite some time had passed since he had been brought to this room and asked to wait. Even the best behaved student might have grown dissatisfied or anxious with the situation by now, but the boy stuck to his spot like a scarecrow. He was chilled to the bone. It was the end of November and the low temperature in the morning had marked the start of winter. The room was not much warmer. The heater hadn't been turned on. Either he'd missed the teacher telling him to turn it on, or he'd never seen one in his life. He breathed lightly on his freezing fingers as he aimlessly surveyed his surroundings. This dreary place was apparently a meeting room. The other students might have considered it a wonderful place to meet, but to him it was drab and overly spacious. It was a lifeless place that reminded him of an arid cave. Stuck in this cold room with absolutely nothing to do, his mind turned to what they wanted to discuss. Unable to come up with a solid answer, he returned his attention to the sound of the rain. The rain hardly resembled the rain in the mountains, though he could still recognize it barely. Its smell and sound were harsher, but at the end of the day, rain was still rain. So even this world, alien as it was, could have something in common with the mountains. The trivial detail perked him up a little. He liked the town. He liked how the town looked in the rain. Naturally, he so, naturally he preferred sunny weather, but he liked rain in its own way. The fog from the rain had soaked up the scent of the soil, and it reminded him of home. It was a time like these that he was able to numb the anxiety the city gave him. But then he let out a discouraged sigh. How pathetic. He'd already been here 2 weeks and the thoughts of his hometown still made him sad. Muss kurz was machen. Gleich wieder da, gleich da. Good. Perhaps feeling that he was being unfair to his new life, he composed himself and continued to wait patiently. As if having a passion for distractions, his attention returned to the sound of the rain once more. Waiting like this didn't seem to be particularly hard for him. He quietly endured the numbing cold and the hour alone with calm, deep breaths. As the saying goes, good things come to those who wait. A strong point of his or not, he was astonishingly patient. It was certainly helping him out in this moment. Noch ein Sportplatz. Das war ein sehr smoother Übergang. Sehr smooth. Tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap, tip, tap. She, on the other hand, was livid. The profile of the transferred student had been explained to her on her way to the meeting room. She was told he had lived his whole life up in the mountains without any electricity. had meant more than half of civilized society would have been an utter mystery to him.
なんて絶望的な断絶。 戦
Miserable
後どこ
level
ろ
of
か戦前の
isolation.
話じゃない。
How is this
ロ
even
ビンソンに
possible?
も程がある。
Post-war Japan. He's like Robinson Crusoe. She had every right to be angry. His village had apparently remained isolated in the mountains for many years. Contact with villagers in the foothills of the mountains only occurred once a month or so, which was unfathomable in modern Japan. Although expressways and Japan Rail, the old national railways, now spanned the country like arteries, it wasn't entirely impossible for mountain villages like this to exist. But she couldn't imagine how someone born to such circumstances would think or live.
電気がないって
When you say no
村に
electricity,
行き渡
you
ってい
mean
ない
in
だけで
general, right?
公衆電話ぐらい
You
は
must
あったんです
have
よ
had
ね。
access to a public
なかったそうだ
phone.
よ。
Apparently
こっ
not.
ちに暮らすようになっ
He
て
mentioned how
まず
shocked
驚いた
was
のが
by
電話
the
だそう
phone
だ
when he
し、
started living
電話って
here.
便利ですね
I kid
なん
you
て
not,
真
he
顔で言われて
said,
ね。
wow, telephones are
そういえ
so
ばそうだな
useful.
と
Couldn't
再
really
確認
deny
させら
it
れたぐら
though.
いだよ。
Could I? She shot a sidelong glare his way as he laughed. It seemed that the naivete of the country boy had cheered up Mr. Yamashiro a bit.
駐在もいないって
They
こと
probably
か。
didn't have. They probably
うちも
didn't
実家
have
は山
police
奥ですから
officers either.
電気が
My
通ってい
family
ない
home
の
is
は
up
あり
in
え
the
ないとは言いま
mountains,
せん
so
け
it's
ど、
not inconceivable. They wouldn't have electricity.
そいつ
But he
学
doesn't
校も知ら
even
ない
know
んです
how
か？
what school is. Nope.
どんなもの
He'd
かは
heard
知っ
of
ていた
them,
そうだけど、
but
実
this
際
is
来るのは
apparently
今
his
日が
first
初め
time
てだし、
visiting one. Maybe
それで
that's
緊張
why
してい
he's
たのかな。
nervous. He wasn't
あまり、
very talkative.
ああいうのも野生児っていうのか
What would you
な。
call it?
狼に育てられた
Like a
狼
boy
少年
raised by
みたいな。
wolves, I suppose.
あ、いや
That makes
探検隊
his-
の話だね。
the safari.
怖
Hey,
い
you're
な、
staring
青
me,
崎くん。
Awazaki.
冗
I
談
was joking.
冗談
Go easy,
大丈
okay?
夫。
And don't
話してみた
worry.
感
I
じ
got the feeling
おと
from
なしい子だ
talking
った
to
か
him
ら。
that he's a nice kid. He
なん
was
ていう
almost
か
like, I don't know, a
言葉の
cute
通じ
little
ない
animal
小
that
動
doesn't
物。
speak human.
山城先生
Your jokes
その
and
例え
metaphors
気休めになってませんから
aren't helping. As she gave her blunt reply, she tried to simulate in her mind what life without electricity would be like, but the thought of it took her sour mood from bad to worse. After all, it was a world she had never known. She could understand why the teachers had given up. She too wanted to give up and return to her warm bed, but her good-for-nothing pride was holding her hostage. Not only did the teachers believe she was up to the task, but she also believed she could do it. It wasn't that easy to go back on her word, no matter how bad things looked after the fact. She walked along the hallway, the rain pattering in the background. The meeting room was already in sight. With a furrowed brow, she fixed her long hair in anticipation of meeting the unknown stranger within. Her elegant strides were like those of a confident general going into battle.
いや、青崎くん、
Awazaki,
君を信
I
頼してる
believe
僕だけど、
you
念のため確認しておくよ。
Be nice,
なんていう
okay?
か、
Can you at least
作り
try
笑い
to
は
smile?
苦手です
I'm bad at
一応
faking
努力
smiles,
している
but I do my best.
そうなんだ。
Really?
そ
That's
い
a
や
relief.
ー、ほんとよかった。
I really meant it.
青崎くんに
I
も
mean
苦手な
it.
ものってあった
It's
んだ
good
ね。
to know you're not good at everything. Mr. Yamashiro's shoulders slumped the second they reached the meeting room. As he put his hand to the door, his eyes seemed to say her, "Be nice, please." This one only made her more irritated.
分かってるわよ
I already know
愛想が
I'm
悪
not
い
the
って
friendliest looking person anymore.
でも笑顔な
But
ん
I
て
can
意識して作
just
るもの
make
じゃないん
myself
だし
smile at the drop
大
of a
体
hat.
そういう
You
イ
should have
ンスタントな
asked
人付き合いなら
Toby
飛び丸の方が向いてる
if
って
that's what you were after. She sighed about her social shortcomings, but then it occurred to her that being called into school on a day off while sleep deprived wasn't anything to smile about anyway. She also thought the person responsible for this mess would be better off attending elementary school. It might be not be his fault, but neither was it her duty or obligation to do the teacher's work for them. At the very least, they could have used their brains and organized all this on a normal school. School day, another complaint she wanted to voice later.
いや、というか
I
敵。
hate him already. He's
な
my
んであろ
sworn
うと
enemy
敵。
and I haven't even met
悪い
him.
けど、
Sorry,
上
but
場
I
酌
couldn't
量以
care
前
less
に
about
敵。
his extenuating
間が悪いのはお
circumstances.
互い様っ
You
ていう
think
か。
this isn't awkward for me
本当、
too?
なんで
Honestly,
よりも
why
やっ
did
て
this
こんな
have to
忙しい時
happen
に。
when I'm so busy? Her pounding headache from a lack of sleep and boosted her aggression by a 10%. No matter how harmless the guy on the other side of the door may be, anyone who disturbed her sleep was the enemy. And just as she was reaching peak annoyance, Mr. Yamashiro opened the door to the meeting room. The room slowly slid into view. She didn't care for formalities, just looked straight ahead and stormed into the room, and found herself face to face with a most unusual opponent. Before we go on, let's see from another perspective, turning back the clock just a little. You don't have to do anything. For some, these words are priceless luxury. For others, they're unbearable torture. For the proactive girl, it was definitely the former, though she'd be too suspicious of the motives of anyone giving her such a gift to accept it. For the passive boy, it was definitely the latter, a bitter thorn that had made him homesick, though at its very moment, his mind was still distracted with the wait for his face to reveal any discontent. He maintained perfect posture as he stared at the grey sky. He had already waited a whole hour, but figured that they must have had their reasons for making him wait. And as long as he had the sound of the rain to soothe him, he could keep on waiting.
でも
It must
そろ
be
そ
the
ろ火事を
9
過ぎるの
o'clock
か
already. Yeah, that seems about right. He had vaguely keeping track of the time as he listened to the rain. Due to the holiday, the school building was completely silent, except for the patter of the rain on the window. The mood felt as damp as the air. It was then he heard the heavy clatter of footsteps
よかっ
approaching.
た忘れられているかと思っ
I
た
thought they'd forgotten about me. He could hear the two sets of footsteps, one heavier set belonging to an adult. He breathed a sigh of relief as the door slid open.
すまないね
So
随分
sorry
と
to
お
keep
待た
you
せし
waiting. The first person he saw was a man wearing glasses and an awkward smile. That's Mr. Yamashiro, the one who
て
brought me here.
あれ
Hey, where's
里
Mr.
中先生
Satonaka?
いないん
I
です
told
か
him to keep you company. He
ひどいな。
shouldn't have left you here. Mr. Yamashiro scratches his head, looking increasingly apologetic. And then from behind him, with a tight-lipped expression that made it clear she didn't want to be here, a dark-haired girl with determined look in her eyes appeared. Sehen wir jetzt den Main Character oder die Main Characterin? Nein, nein. Das fühlt sich an, wie als würde die Kamera stehen bleiben. Doch nicht. Okay, das ist Landkuhn. Dann haben wir Stadtgirl. Sojiro gulped. Sojiro. The sound of the rain on the window faded into nothingness. That's when he knew this is how it felt when time stood still. She blinked quickly a few times as if taken aback. Why was anyone's guess? The boy was everything she'd expected a naive country boy to look like. However, she felt something she couldn't understand. His eyes widened slightly, as if taken aback. The reason was obvious. Putting his feeling into words was a different matter altogether. So we will never know exactly what he experienced in that moment. It seems as if something was rising, and it was not just the shield he wore. That's when it hit him. He sensed he'd been touched by the hands of destiny.
紹介するよ
Allow me to
彼が転入
introduce
生
you to
の
a few.
静木
This is the
宗十郎
Chinese
君
student I mentioned, Sojiro Shizuki. assume.
でこっちの彼女がしずきくんの案内役。うちの生徒会長で休日をして新しい仲間の案内役を買って出てくれた青崎青子くんだ。
Her name is Aokoi Aozaki. His voice and the sound of the rain seemed distant. This is how they first met. Such was their start, for better or worse, like the ephemeral beauty of fireworks. It was commonly believed among the students that Aoko was always in a foul mood. But this gossip was 90% prejudice, as Aoko simply didn't have time to be irritated 24/7. The reality was she simply didn't want to explain herself all the time, and therefore seemed angry about something obvious or not. This idle gossip did, however, lead to her earning the title of one of school's 7 deadly threats. The remaining 10% of the gossip was right on the mark. Aoko herself often had the feeling that her tendency to feel animosity towards harmless things was akin to what a chronic headache sufferer might experience. Today fell under that 10%. For today her anger was pure, and her childish and selfish display was befitting of her actual age. The meeting was dimly lit, awash in the colors of the rain. To reduce electricity costs, school regulations forbid the use of lights during the day. This was the setting of 3 of them found themselves in. Her first impression was that this calm demeanor reminded her of a field of wildflowers. In spite of his perfect posture, his overall air felt placid, tame even. And though describing him as meek would be going too far, at the very least he was passive. Even though through his uniform she could see that he was thinner than average. His dark hair was unattempted, and he came across as a wholly forgettable boy. Hatte Bandagen unter seiner Kleidung. If she had looked at him in a more positive light, she would describe him more a young man than a boy. It was his calm demeanor that made him seem more mature. Was that the cause of Aoko's reasonless reaction? He seemed almost too at home in the meeting room, and she was left with the impression that it was her and the teacher, not his outsider, who were the guests here. She felt an unidentifiable aggravation building within her, almost as if her right to be here was in question. Aoko felt herself raising her natural defenses. What's with me? Am I really this angry for no reason? She hated not understanding things, her own emotions in particular. It pained her less than you would imagine for a perfectionist like her, but still nagged her like a thorn in the side.
いやー、ほら、青崎くん、挨拶してあげなくちゃ。
Why don't you introduce yourself? Mr. Yamashiro's attempt to relieve the tension was equally irritating.
挨拶?
Introduce myself, huh? After casting a nasty glance in the teacher's direction, Aoko turned to face the boy. From an outsider's perspective, it might have looked like a stare down. And in that instant, the culmination of her emotional state hurtled toward the innocent boy and skewered him. Sorry for the wait, Shizuki. Hearing his name, Sojiro came to his senses. His stunned gaze shook loose. He took a deep breath to clear his head. Chalking it up to nerves, Mr. Yamashiro broke out a smile and turned to the girl standing beside him.
紹介するよ。彼が転入生のしずき宗十郎くん。で、こっちの彼女がしずきくんの案内役。うちの生徒会長で休日をして新しい仲間の案内役を買う。
Having been introduced to Miss Yamashiro, the girl took a step forward. Her eyes were merciless. Was there an unspoken threat to violently trample her opponent? Sojiro, on the other hand, managed to keep his own composure despite the shock at how confrontational she appeared. He had never been greeted quite like this before, but supposed mistakenly that this was how people treated each other in the city. The exchange must have looked quite dramatic to an onlooker. A girl ready to brawl, an earnest country boy desperate to understand. It was a murderous limbo, especially for anyone in the room with them. Like Mr. Yamashiro, for example. While he had thought he had made the right decision in choosing an honor student to help him out, she was in an inexplicably bad mood, and the tension in the air was undeniable. It was at this moment that he realized his failure. This realization had come far too late. One false move and this girl, for whom no problem was too large, would becoming a storm that would rock the very foundations of the school. Just as the almighty Joker card could bring either fortune or disaster, the sole teacher who had been present at the time would come to bear the blame for the scandal that ensued. Wow, you two seem to have it off. I suppose I can leave you to it then. Mr. Yamashiro laughed nervously as he crept toward the door. I'll be in the faculty room. Stop by when you're finished. You'll be alright, won't you, Asaki? You're the student council president. Don't let me down. Flieht. Hat ihn. Ist aber weg. Oh, der Meinung, das ist nicht. Mr. Yamashiro left, leaving the two in a locked eye state, one in which one set of eyes was doing all the glaring. All that remained in the room was an artless boy and a cross-armed guarded girl. The two lingered in silence. They resembled shogi players and agonizing over their first moves. Though it was only Aoko who was reading so much into the situation, she decided to put her irritation aside for the time being. With no reason to feel revulsion for him in the first place, she sighed deeply and faced Sojiro. Whatever. It's not like this is my first time Mr. Yamashiro landed me in it. So, what's your name again? Her tone was nothing, if not reproachful, though he had done nothing to offend her. But the boy failed to pick up on it. Incapable of such venom himself.
Shizuki Sojiro かな。君は青崎さんだったね。
Miss Aosaki, right? For whatever reason, he came across as happy in his response.
さんはいいわ。柄じゃないから。
Stop the miss. That's not
こ
my
っちは
style.
しずきくんでいい？
Is Shizuki fine?
いいって。
What do you mean?
だから呼び方。
What do you mean? What do I mean?
何？
Hello?
おかしなこと言った？
Did I say something weird?
いや、すごく。
Yeah, very. The boy replied immediately, as if it was a natural response, but quickly second-guessed himself.
いや、いいんだ。
Never mind, that must be normal here.
しずきくんで
You
頼む。
can call me Shizuki.
君は
You
青
mind
崎
if
で
I
いいんだ
call
よ
you
な。
Aosaki?
よろしく。
Suit yourself. She followed her blunt reply with a swift turn away from him. While she was hardly thrilled at the prospect of the task at hand, it had been entrusted to her and it was her personal policy to see it through to the end.
悪いけど、優しくしてあげ
Sorry,
る気は
but
ない
I'm
から。
not in the mood for pleasantries.
時間も惜しいし、
Time
手
is
早く
short,
行く
so
わよ。
let's get this over with.
それは助かる。やっぱり
Sure,
時
I
間は
know
大
your
切だ。
time is valuable. Aoko's blunt rancor was lost on him once again. Humans tend to be overly conscious about being ignored, whatever form that takes. But despite being peeved at landing none of her attacks, Aoko did her best to act professional and directed her guest into the hallway. Ob das wirklich klappt? Einfach nett sein. Klappt immer. Einfach jemand ist itch zu dir oder pissig. Einfach wegnetten. Einfach. Ja, das ist nett. Danke. There was no sunlight in the hallway, nor any sign of life. This was more like a prison than the cave that was the meeting room. As it dawned on Aoko that the hallway matched her mood, she sighed once again.
まず聞いておくけど、
First things first,
山城
did
先
you
生から
understand
聞いたことは
everything?
理解してる。
Mr. Yamashiro explained to you?
ああ、学校の仕組みについては分か
I
っ
got
た。
how the school works.
この建物全部に同
It's
い
still a
年の
bit
人間がい
hard
る
to
なんて。
imagine that
ちょ
everyone
っと
here
想
is
像できない
around
け
the
ど。
same age.
そう、よかったわね。
I see. Great. Aoko rubbed her forehead. The Sojuro kid had no idea what he was in for. Apparently all he heard about school was that it was a place where a lot of people met to study. High school teachers imparted to students their knowledge in various fields of study while fostering discipline and creativity, but never did Aoko imagine that she would have to explain the concept of school itself to someone. Yes, fundamentals were important, but this was absurd. She had serious doubts whether he could even handle classes, but Mr. Yamashiro insisted that things would work out somehow. Sojiro had managed to pass the transfer exam after all, barely.
ま、私には関
Not
係
my
ないけど。
problem. Aoko grumbled mentally as she walked down the hallway. She consoled herself with the face that today would be the only day she'd spent with this boy out of time, or at least she tried to keep it that way.
青崎、
Aozaki? He asked calmly, trying to get her
Nani?
attention. What?
こっちも一つ聞い
Can
て
I
いいか
ask
な
you something?
だから何？
Yes, what is it?
俺の気のせいだと思うんだが
I、could be wrong
君はま
about
る
this,
で
but you
何
seem
かを
upset
睨んでいる
about
よう
something.
に、やはり
You're not
今
the
朝は
morning
悪いもの
person,
でも。
are you? His gaze revealed earnest concern as if asking her if she'd remembered to eat breakfast. It was like another hammer to her head. Oh Gott, dieses Gesicht. It was true that Aoko had been glaring at Sojiro the entire time. Glaring red-hot daggers, in fact. Not just at him, but the universe. Even on her best days, her roommate used to remark.
青子の視線は普通の人には
Most
厳
people
しいわ。
can't handle your scowl, Aoko.
もう少し
It wouldn't
多
hurt
くのこと
to
に
be a
寛
little
大
more
に。
tolerant. She'd been warned that her emotions were so naked on her face that people treated her like a powder cake. How naive could the boy be that he could not pick up on this?
私をバカに
He's
してる
not making fun
っ
of
て
me,
わ
is
けじゃ
he?
なさそう
No,
よ。
he couldn't be. Even she found her own attempt to reassure herself unconvincing. It began to dawn on Aoko far too late that compared to her, this laid-back transfer student might as well have been from another planet.
いいわ。言葉にしないとわからないようだから言うけど、あなたの気のせいじゃなくて、私は視線で遠回しに感情を表現してたの。いちいち声に出すのも、会話にするのもね。
In response to her words, the Martian clapped his hands together.
なるほど。
It makes
どうして
sense.
そうしたいのか
I
は
don't
わから
know
ない
why
が、
you'd want to
確か
get
に
that you want
そっちの方
to
が
do
手っ
it
取り
that
早い
way.
意思表現だ。
I get that it's faster way to express yourself. Sojiro accepted her reasoning without argument, though he still had no idea what kinds of emotion she was trying to express. It was as if he could hear the words but didn't grasp the meaning. Ideas that should have connected were instead separated into blocks.
確かにずれて
So
るわ。
it's true.
こ
He
い
really is peculiar. Mr. Yamashiro's words made sense to her now. What was odd about this boy went way beyond naivety. A stranger in a strange land, he may be, but it was only civilized to forgive him some jet-lag-induced confusion.
つ。じゃ、とりあえずあなたの教室に行くから。
She had regained her composure. Sojiro raised his hand and stopped in his track.
あと一つ。
Just one more thing. Aoko waited for Sojiro to continue. The boy was patient to her fall. She rubbed her forehead with her hand again, nursing a vague feeling of uneasiness.
これもちょっとした疑問なんだが、
To ask,
なんで君は怒ってるんだ？
Why are you saying-
怒るのが商売とか、
is it
そういう家柄の人なのか？
business, or does it run in your family? A long silence. Though she knew it wouldn't change the situation, she remembered her regret at answering the phone that morning. He meant no harm. She repeated this thought like a mantra in an attempt to keep her impulses in check.
別にあなたのせいじゃないから気にする必要はないわ。ただこの一瞬とお昼まで眠っていた場合を計りにかけたら
With that vaguely answer, she'd started to walk again and turned her gaze away from this rude stranger named Sojiro Shizuki. While what constitutes normal is certainly up for debate, most would undoubtedly refer to him as so. He was a simple and nice boy with nondescript features. If he were an ice cream flavor, he would be vanilla. Der Burn. Einfach ihn einfach als Vanilleeis beschreiben. And Sojiro found Aoko to be very businesslike and full of life. There was a certain purpose to her movements as they began and ended in an orderly fashion. The way her finger raised when she pointed at things. The way she made her way across the hallways and classrooms. The way she would occasionally glance back at him to make sure he was keeping her pace. Each and every movement was so impressive that he couldn't take his eyes off her. Oh yeah, das sieht aus wie eine Love Story. Aoko showed him to his room, home in Class C of the 11th grade. The room certainly displayed more of a human touch than the previous meeting room, but Soju was none the wiser as to its functions. Aoko gave a brief explanation before they visited individual subject classrooms, as well as the gym, cafeteria, locker room, and school infirmary. Sojiro asked so many questions that much time passed before they reached the AV room on the second floor.
まずいな。
Oh dear. Sojiro stopped looking genuinely concerned.
あと20分経つと1
20
時だ。
to 1 already.
嘘でしょ。
You're kidding, right? The
う
school
ちの
hasn't
校舎
been-
そんな広くないわよ。
We'll be done soon. The tour had begun around 10, which meant the 3 hours had passed. The tour of a school shouldn't take anywhere near this long.
そうだったわね。
Maybe if you didn't
行く
ask so
先
many
々で根掘り葉掘り
questions,
聞かれちゃ
it's a miracle
そりゃ何時間でも
it
た
stayed out. Aoko glared at Sojiro. She was being sarcastic, of course, knowing full well he would never pick up on it. Is he? To her surprise, he looked down apologetically, unable to hide his dejection.
なんだこいつ。
Oops, I think I
ちゃんとして
think I broke him. The guy before her now was nothing like earlier, in contrast to seeing his once impenetrable veneer. When they first met, she found herself feeling sympathetic. Momentarily at least, until her irritation returned in full force.
で、何がまずいの？
What's the hurry?
覚えることが多すぎてパンクし
いや、それもあるけど、 学校のことは別にして1時になるとまずい。
Sojiro's gaze wandered as if worried about something. If he was worried about the weather, he would have a hard time seeing it as there were no windows in this
へ
harbor.
え、時間を気にする。そう。人の予定を引っかき回しておいて自分だけ好きなよ。なんだ、顔に似合わずいい人ね。
いや、褒めても何も出ないぞ。
I guess that's nice of you to say.
誰も褒めちゃいないわよ。
Not a compliment. She yelled at him, unable to hold back her fury.
で、
Well,
で、
well, what?
それで
What's
一体何の
happening in
用
20
なの？
minutes? Sojiro's face lit up as he finally understood what she was asking.
そこは秘密にし
It's a secret. He said with perfectly straight
慣
face.
れ始めたつもりだったけど
Every time I think
こいつの
I've got this
こうい
guy
った
figured
テンポ
out,
に
he
失
finds
神
a
し
way
そう
to
にな
trick
る
me
わ。
up. Her frustration was natural. Still, she did everything she could to stifle her fears and fake a smile.
しずきくん、
You want to repeat that, Shizuki? She took a step forward.
秘密だってば。
Like I said, it's a secret. Feeling the mood changed drastically. Sojiro took a step back. And another. And another. No matter how many steps he took back, she kept edging toward him. She was smiling, but he thought he could see the blood boiling beneath her skin.
これ、さい
First
あなた
question, do you enjoy
私をからかって
mocking
楽しい。
me? He had no intention of mocking her, though at this point he doubted presenting any evidence to prove this would do much to erase that forced smile on her face.
説明する。
Let me explain. His arms raised in surrender. She halted her advance and freed her face from that unseemly smile.
実は1時からアルバイトがあるんだ。
Part-time job shift
でもここはそういうの禁止なんだろ
but students aren't allowed to have jobs for
そうだけど
it. Yeah, wait.
あ
You
禁止されてるから秘密にしようと思ったの
because you thought you'd get a
バ
job?
カ
All you
ね
have to do is get
それなら許可さえ
permission
下りていれ
知ってる。
I
試験の
know,
時
and
に
I
許可
did.
を
I
もらっ
got
てる。
permission when they accepted me to the school.
へえ
Really? Aoko's face lit up as she realized he might not be the piece of work she thought him to be. Yet,
しかし
but I
許
only
可は
got
一つしか
permission
も
for
らえな
one
かっ
of my jobs.
ん
Wait, you have more than one job.
た。これでも2件減らしたんだ。生活費だけで大変な
Living
のに。
expenses are bad enough.
学費まで
Now I
稼がな
have
くちゃ
to
いけない。
earn money for school as well.
なのに働き先は一つだけというのはあんまりだと思う。
いやあんまりなのはあなたの方だと思うけ
I
ど
think you're the one who's being unreasonable, though it still irritated her opinion of him changed a little. She was impressed that he was able to take care of his tuition and living expenses all on his own. She could also empathize with having no time on to oneself. Her anger began to subside. The words part-time job were about the last thing she ever expected to hear about out of this country boy's mouth.
そういうことなら仕方ないわね
Well, you gotta do what you gotta do.
いいわ
like this.
行きなさ
It's
いよ
fine, you can go.
事情は
I get
青
it.
崎はいいのか？
You will be okay. Will you be okay? She had no idea what this question meant, but she at least understood he was trying to be considerate, which also took her by surprise. She figured he'd just be distanced about people's feelings as he was about everything else.
別に
I'll be
私もこのま
fine.
ま
I'll just at home. First, so she thought it'd be best that they both stopped by the faculty room. Mr. Yamashiro had mentioned that the transfer procedures had already been completed, so it remained first for him to sign off on her duties.
先生案内終わりました
それはお疲れ様。しずきくんもお疲れ様。
ありがとうございます。なんとい
そうかそうか。うん、明日から頑張りなさい。
山城先生のことは気にしないでいい教え子に厄介なことを押し付けてふんぞり返っているぐらい職員室が好きなんだから何時間でも待ってるでしょいや待ってるべき
そうか。青崎がいいんならいいんだな。
If you're fine with it, then so am I.
ん
Huh? There it was again. Whatever Sojiro was getting at, Aoko had no idea.
それじゃあ行くよ。
I'm going
今日
to
はあ
get
りがとう。
going. Thanks again for
今日だ
today.
けよ今日だけ
Yes, today. Only today. She shooed him away with her hand. His face bent in a broad smile as if he found the gesture endearing. It was a softer expression than she had grown accustomed to seeing out of him. It was the kind of smile that would make anyone smile back. Well, most people at least. Aoko Aozaki didn't betray the slightest hint of a smile.
それじゃあまた。
See you later. Huh? And with that friendly farewell, Sojiro walked toward the end of the hallway. Or so she thought before he turned into the next class over. Did he just? Sojiro headed straight for one of the classrooms. Whereupon he opened it with ease. The chilly November air filled the room as the soft sound of the rain doubled in volume. In that instant, she realized his intention with opening a window. She really wished she hadn't.
いや待て待て待て
No, stop! He already had one leg out the window when she dashed to him, stop him.
何するつもりよ
What
あ
do
ん
you
たは
think you're doing?
何ってアルバイトに行くんだけど。
From a job, that's what.
その窓は人が出入りするところじゃないの
This window isn't an exit.
だい
don't
た
you?
いここ何階だと思ってる
Do
の
you even know what floor we're on? She saw the light of understanding dawn in his eyes. She saw the light of understanding dawn in his
死ぬ
eyes.
ところだった。
Oh my god, I
2
almost
階から降
died.
りたら危な
Who
すぎ
would
る。
put an exit here? This is dangerous.
危ないのはあん
It's
た
the
の
lack of
頭
something between your ears that's dangerous. Haben die keine Fenster? Also, her insult went right over his
あの
head.
ねこっちじゃ窓から人は出入りしないのさっき言っとくべきだったわ
Probably remember this information for further
知ってる
reference.
よ。 時間がないんで慌ててたんだ。ありがとう。これからは気を。
He pulled his leg back and closed the window. His school uniform was soaking wet from the rain.
いいけど、私は別に。あなたがどこから外に出ようが関係ないもの。ただ、できれば、それより、あなた、本当に。
来るよ。
Yeah, I'm
不
a
安だ
little
けど
nervous though,
案内してもらった
which
し。
is why I came in early for the tour. He bid her farewell before running away down the hall. She hoped he would walk down the stairs and leave through the school entrance like a normal person.
大丈夫なのか
I wonder if
あん
he's
なんで。
really going to be okay here. The image of him disappearing into the distance popped into her head in spite of her ire. She had no intention of spending any more time with him, and yet she felt strangely anxious. She couldn't tell if the feeling was fueled by concern or irritation. Why had she even gotten angry with this insignificant transfer student in the first place? A strange day, with a strange transfer student resulting in strange emotions? Her head tilted as she reflected on what she had been more enjoyable day than the irritating experience she just had.
いっか。
Whatever.
どうせこれっきり
Let's
なんだ
not
し。
as if I'll see him again. Den Morgen? Nein. The sound of rain echoed quietly all around her. Aber it's not like I'll ever see him again. It's offensichtlich eine Herausforderung des Schicksals. Jinxen. The sound of the rain echoed quietly all around her. The grey sky seemed frozen in time. It was impossible to discern whether it was morning or evening. Mr. Yamashiro and Aoko were likely the only ones left at school. The unlit classroom looked overly gloomy and ominous as Aoko stood in it alone. She pulled up her left sleeve. Her dainty, unremarkable watch showed that it was almost 1 o'clock.
時間。
He was right about the time. She looked out the window at the grounds below. She saw a boy in uniform running through the rain without an umbrella aside. She must have been seen, but for whatever reason affected her far more than she wished. Ja, der kommt morgen nicht in die Schule, der ist jetzt krank. Aoko did not stop by the faculty room before heading home. While Mr. Yamashiro's offer to drive her home was tempting, she decided it would ultimately be far more satisfying to ruin his day just as he had hers. She walked as quietly as she could toward the entrance and opened her bright red umbrella. As she had predicted that morning, the rain was waning in the afternoon. At this rate, it would probably cease completely in an hour or so. The distant sunshine would likely have reached her by the time she arrived home.
ま、それも悪くない
I
か。
suppose it could be worse. She shrugged her shoulders in resignation. She neither liked nor disliked rain, but she found herself enjoying her walk home with her red umbrella in hand. The teachers at Misaki High School weren't fond of bright colors, so Aoko's red umbrella was an unusual sight. A ghost story about how the umbrella was once pure, with White had been making the rounds, but it featured Aoko instead of a ghost. It was with that umbrella that she made her way toward Misaki Station. Misaki Private High School took its namesake from the town it was in. The area was once a sprawl of farmland and woodland, but rapid growth over the last 10 years had led to unprecedented modernization. There were some who fought to preserve Misaki's natural
残す
treasures.
ことには賛成ですが
I agree in the
それでは
principle
残すだけになって
preserving
しまう
the
でしょう
land, but not at the expense of our prosperity. With those words, the mayor snuffed out the voices of the minority and ushered in a long-term plan for new urban development. More than enough funds for the urban development were collected, and the unassuming town of Misaki became the largest municipality of Misaki City in nearly 10 years, even though it lacked the modernity of neighboring Yashirori or the elegance of Misaki Hills.
それも当然よね。どういじくってももともとが山中の宿場町だし、山ごと切り崩すっていう。
Urbanization had been contained to the lowlands around the station, with most of the hills and mountains still standing as they did 10 years prior. The exhaustion of funds succeeded in protecting the old Misaki where the citizens could not. It became a truly odd suburban town, welcoming an increasingly urban population with its vestiges of old country charm. Misaki High School was a private school established long before the town's current state. The original campus, built 50 years ago, was located high up in the mountains, making its current location its second incarnation. The path to the old grounds was not only steep and remote, it had become an overgrown game trail with passage of time. For these reasons, among others, Misaki High School school had been shuttered until almost 20 years ago, when it received a donation from a department store chain that allowed for the construction of a new campus in the city. And thus Misaki High School reopened its doors, the old woodland campus forgotten. In fact, most of the students attending Misaki High School were not from Misaki at all. The hearty, rustic people of this country town preferred prefectural schools to private ones. Truth be told, Aoko herself was one of them. All she had wanted after junior high was to move to Tokyo, where she hoped to spend her days touring her favorite bands on her way to entering a public university. But her hopes were dashed with her sister's departure, so here she was, walking alone in town, with only a red umbrella to keep her company on what should have been a day off.
思い返してみると、
Looking back on it now,
私の人生って
it's like
なん
my
か
whole
災難
life
続
has
きっ
been
ぽい。
one disaster, but never. Her frustration evaporated into the cold December air. Ist schon Dezember, ich
でも
dachte
ま、
vorhin war
い
es
っ
noch
か。
November.
退屈だけはしないわけだし。
Oh well, at least it's not boring. With those words, her mood brightened a bit as she left the school in her wake. A busier part of town met her at the bottom of the gently sloping road. Misaki's train station was brand new. Once looking no prettier than an abandoned factory, it had been renovated into a multi-purpose structure with huge department stores on its east and west sides. Wird's das Q? Tatsache, das Q geht in den Rand. When the department stores first opened, Aoko and her friends had been impressed with their modern feel, but in time the stores too became dated. She had no shopping to do today, so she passed them by. What she really wanted to do was rest at the cafe, but she fought the urge, knowing her roommate would never let her hear the end of it if she frittered away her money. Oh, this is weird. She looked back and blinked. For just a moment she could have sworn she seen someone suspicious in a red dress out of the corner of her eye. Das war weird. Das war seltsam, ein Fragezeichen. Huh? It must have been her imagination. The sixth sense chill she was experiencing down her spine was a familiar one at this point. She continued her walk home, brushing off the event as if it had never happened. And the chill faded now, and it was like, oops. Was left was the sound of the town. She sighed heavily. Had she imagined it? Even if it had all been in her head, she was far from comfortable with the feeling that still lingered. Danke, Amber.
夏場の方ってもう
Even
少しこう
mosquitoes have the grace to buzz off eventually. She grumbled under her breath.
波乱万丈、
Whatever
商
good
売
or
繁
bad,
盛、
this is
商業無常
this
と
too shall pass. So the saying
そうそう
goes.
忙しさに愚痴を言っても始まらないわ。
Unfortunately, summer and bugs go hand in hand. She could see how bugs could be drawn to all the sweet fruit. Küche. A rank with grease and heated kitchen was closed for the time being. The lunch rush had come and gone. One last battle remained, dinner time. Only after the evening chaos could the kitchen crew remove their white armor and call it a day. In the midst of the war zone was a lone newcomer. Do I have to wear this? His voice was uneasy, betraying how new he was.
気持ちはわかる。俺もどうかと思うけど、店長の言うことだから、もう笑顔で乗り越えてくれ。これも商店街の明日のためなんだとよ。本気で申し訳ないんだが、雨も止んだし。
His bright orange co-worker clasped his hands together as if to beg for forgiveness as he saddled him with this unreasonable task. 10 years ago, Misaki City was a zone of farm and woodland, but everything had changed. The front of the station was now lined with tall multi-story buildings, and the residential areas were similarly full of apartment complexes. The once rustic scenery around the station had long become a thing of the past. Shiroinuska was the only place in the city that still contained vestiges of the old town. Pocket of the past inside an urban jungle. The road extended up a conspicuously high hill to an old residential district far from the hustle and bustle of the train station. Long ago it had been considered unwise to build on high ground. Nobody lived about a certain elevation. Shiroinuska, sitting as it did atop a hill in the middle of town, was no exception to that convention and had no residences to speak of. The asphalt continued for some time, eventually giving way to a mountain road that was swallowed into the cover of the trees. Lone vending machines stood to mark the boundary between town and beyond. Even the children knew that there was nothing beyond the new playground and development that so enthralled them. Well, that was not entirely true. There was nothing besides the haunted house. Aoka Aosaki traversed the long slope. Below her she could see the whole of Misaki. The symmetrical town looked like a miniature set from the side. It would look like a painting if there had been a sea next to it, but unfortunately Misaki City was very much landlocked. While it was overcast in the morning, at the moment the scene was quite breathtaking on clear evenings. The view was the one thing that made the arduous climb worthwhile, and today she had been denied even that. I'd
雨の日は自転車も使えないし、1日に2回ぐらい。
Be a fine thing. Aoko had been using this road to get to school for almost 2 years now, but the journey had never gotten easier.
あれ、鍵閉まったまま？
It's locked.
アリス、
I
ま
guess
だ帰っ
Alice
てきて。
isn't back yet. With a very shrug, she put her hand on the rusty iron face. Quietly, the heavy gate swung open as if to welcome her home. There sits atop that hill a haunted house. That is how the story much shared around town used to begin. But fresh rumors about the house had sprung to life almost as fast as the town's modernization. Despite being dilapidated and abandoned for many years, lights can be seen inside the house at night. An angry murder of crows often gathers atop the hill before mysteriously vanishing. Children get lost in the fog, never to be seen again. Late at night, a shrieking sound can be heard all the way to town. This particular piece of slander was the one Aoko wished to discredit the most. The final rumor was of an eye-catching luxury car that sometimes made its way up hidden down the hill. The rumors spread and grew by the day, and while they grew, the house that everyone thought had rotted away was restored over the recent years. Deep in the wood, atop of the hill no one dared to approach, like a ruin shrouded from view even one of the brightest days. Stood a relic out of time, a building from fairy tale. The house was the Kuonji mansion. Kuonji mansion. Everyone in town knew about the witch's house on the hill. It was an unabashedly haunted house where Aoko Aosaki resided for reasons known only to her. Needless to say, it was not really haunted. The Kunoji family home was a grand western-style mansion with a long and storied history stretching all the way back to England. It was too small to be a dormitory, yes, too big to be called a house. The main building contained as many as 3 normal houses worth of rooms and was surrounded by a large all-encompassing courtyard. The perimeter of the grounds was surrounded by a high iron fence and covered in thorny vines. There was also an annex to the main building. Given such extravagance, it was no wonder that it inspired rumors. To the town residents, the mere existence of such a lavish and out-of-place mansion on top of the hill was a cause for suspicion. Rumors, lies, and slander were the prices to be paid for fame. With only 2 lodgers, it was hard to disagree with the perception that vampires must be living here. Well, I know I'm not one, but Alice? She put her hand on the front door. It was a grand double door that would have paired well with a brass lock, and yet it was secured with a little more than a simple keyhole. Pushing it open with one hand, she had entered the supposedly haunted house. Hier kann ich also speichern, okay. By the way, if vampires were not even enough to scare you, ghosts were known to appear on certain nights. Das ist halt gespeichert. Much like the weather outside, the foyer was overcast with shades of grey. Perhaps by deliberate design, the architect had chosen not to include any lights in the entrance area. The ceiling was 2 floors high. The only light in the room came from the skylight. It was particularly gloomy on rainy days. On moonless nights it was like the world itself ceased to be. Aoko decided the drawing room to the east would be a good place to rest, but knowing that she would not be able to relax until she changed clothes, she started up the stairs. The stairs curled up the wall to the 2nd floor hall. There was a 3rd floor attic as well, accessible from the far end of the hall. She had never set foot in there. In 2 years she had lived here, though. The Kuonji mansion was more or less divided into 2 wings, east and west. Aoko had been given the entire east wing, but 2 rooms were more than enough as far as she was concerned. She had no desire to open a door that would trap you in a storybook world or lead to an attic that had only been used for storage these last 5 years. Ja, ehrlich. Es reicht, wenn du die Zimmer kennst, die du kennen musst, ne? Aoko's room was at the end of the east wing long corridor. She had elected for a small room for no other reason. No reason other than that she thought it would be easier to clean. It was furnished with a large bed, her beloved mahogany desk, a wardrobe, and a chest for her clothes, and 2 9-shelf bookcases. That was the extent of what she'd brought from home. Her entire life of 16 years reduced to this. She'd also borrowed the next room down for her own purposes.
そうだ。アリスにもらった見張りと壊れてないかチェックしないと。She needed to see if the project she had been working on all night had borne fruit.
Her study door next served as proof of the life she had been living for the last year, and how different this life was from the one she had lived before. It was not a room for a person she had been. It was a room for the person she would eventually become. A place of solitude that only she could enter, or so she thought.
うわ、
Wow,
壊れてるどころか
vanished
跡
without
形もなく
trace.
消え去ってる。
Vanished.
やっぱ自己流アレンジはまだ早かったか。
Go ahead, love it up, Robin. The noisy neighbor that had intruded upon her sanctuary flew away. My not exceptionally talented Auko did not lack for effort and was not afraid to fall. One could have almost mistaken her approach for optimism. She changed out of her uniform and returned to the first floor. Down the stairs, she opened the door to the east wing. In the corridor, as dark as a cellar. The absence of windows meant it was pitch black without the lights on. So she flicked the switch and entered the nearby doorway. Life without electricity, I don't even want to imagine it. It had been her idea to update the drawing room. The walls were decorated with extravagant patterns, and around the room were large majestic sofas and a luxurious Persian rug. Amidst it all was a 30-inch television that seemed completely out of place. It stood looking over the other furniture like the emperor with no clothes. The mansion's owner would have rather done without it, but to a commoner like Aoko it was an essential commodity. They had fought over its presence at first, but eventually came to an agreement and now mutually enjoyed this modern comfort.
なんだ、人のことは言えないか。うちも案外時代錯誤な。
Now in a somewhat pleasant mood, she decided to brew some tea. She boiled some water in the kitchen, prepared the teapot, and made herself some black tea. Whew. With a flop, she sank into the sofa. She took a sip of her tea and then another. Lulled by the ticking of the clock, she took a third sip as she pondered how to spend her afternoon. The sofa almost seemed to be inviting her, and she sank even further into its comforting embrace. Das wirkt wie ein Platz für morgen. Das heißt, wir speichern einen Speicherpunkt. Yep. Und machen erstmal Schluss für heute. Und damit würde ich sagen, guter Stream und bis